Chapter 461, Another Battle Between Immortals. Xuanhuan stared at the two people intently. This is a battle between immortals. They are using the laws of nature that governs the whole world. Wow! They are so powerful. While biting into a spiritual fruit grown in Xuanhuan, Jiangxi Oyu muffled. Awesome. Now, it was time for Neo to decide if he should give up on Morpheus and escape or return to the virtual reality world to rescue him. Of course, the main character Neo chose the latter. The most thrilling moment came when the two walked in wearing black coats and high boots with a box of weapons in hands. One must admit that humans sometimes shared the concepts of beauty. Besides, many viewers had played some modern games and thus were used to this style of dressing. Dashing. Awesome. In fact, this style of dress was closer to the viewers with long coats, long pants, and high boots. The only difference was the materials of the attire, which made them look strange to the viewers. Song Qingfeng looked down at his Kyokusanagi costume, wondering if he should change his cosplay tomorrow. The battle of the two hackers in the virtual reality world was obviously different from those in the real world. They could speed up, dodge bullets, and use all kinds of close-range combat techniques. The audience exclaimed in awe when they watched the hackers' accurate aiming and the wipeout of the well-equipped police officers working under the agents. All those operations were not human-like. Lin Shai exclaimed, "It's f***ing awesome." Moxian was dumbfounded as well. "Sir, can we learn this? If we can be as awesome as this while doing jobs in Grand Theft Auto 5. While his face twitched, Mr. Fang remembered that the online mode of the game had been full of such immortals before he traveled through space and time. Anyway, the scenes in the movie were indeed thrilling. Neo ran through the gunfire while dodging and firing with all kinds of fancy moves. The enemy's bullets couldn't even touch his clothes. When the gunshots ceased, all were dead except Neo and the heroine. Neo had been growing and could use an ordinary pistol to break steel. When they got up to the roof to take the helicopter, an agent came after them. The way he dodged the bullet is insane. At this moment, the audience stood on the roof and watched Neo fire several strengthened bullets in the blink of an eye. The agent before him was so fast that his movements left a series of after images. Without moving his feet, he had dodged all the bullets. Obviously, Neo was learning this method as well. Everyone looked from Neo's perspective and saw that everything around him slowed down. Even the strengthened bullets shot by the agents looked extremely slow, and they could even see the trajectories of the bullets with their eyes. However, in the eyes of the ordinary people, these bullets were too fast to detect and see with their eyes. This was the famous bullet time. Awesome. Invincible. The scene was indeed cool when Neo in the black windbreaker battled with the expressionless agent in the black suit and sunglasses while the extremely fast bullets shot past them as if it were in slow motion. The young people in the audience exclaimed in astonishment. After all, even warriors with high cultivation strength didn't dare to dodge bullets by swaying their bodies without moving their feet. Besides, the agent's bullets were so fast and powerful that they went beyond the limit set by the laws of nature. With combined forces, the two hackers finally killed one agent. However, they had just killed the police officer whose body had been taken by the agent, and the agent had just returned to where he had come from. This kind of existence obviously couldn't be killed. How can they fire without aiming? The two hackers came into the room where Morpheus was imprisoned. Among the exclamations of the audience, Smith fired with an ordinary pistol, but each bullet shot through the wall without losing any momentum. While Morpheus fled with great speed, the agent shot at him through a thick wall and wounded him in the leg. It is indeed a battle between immortals. Oh my goodness, if I had this power when I played Counter-Strike, I would have gotten first place. Xuanhuan said. Mr. Fang's face turned dark again. Both parties are using the power of laws. Gatinian narrowed his eyes. Guns can be used this way? Ningbai's eyelids twitched. It looked to be a battle of modern weapons, but in fact, it went beyond the realm of weapons. In the eyes of the cultivators, it was a battle of laws. 2 shots from the pistol took down the helicopter. Many people who had played with guns knew the power of ordinary handguns. Then, They saw Smith shoot down Neo's helicopter with 2 shots. Under this situation, they could only run. They would be safe if they could find the exit point and return to the real world. But unfortunately, when Morpheus and the heroine Trinity fled to the telephone booth, the beggar beside it suddenly turned into an agent who then destroyed the telephone booth. The two parties could only engage in the final battle. This was the climax of this movie. Although both people used the most ordinary combat techniques, the horrifying force and speed of each strike were dizzying to look. At last they came into the subway station, and they unleashed all their power. In the eyes of the cultivators and warriors with low-level cultivation strength, it was a fist-to-fist combat of techniques. However, from the perspective of the Grandmasters who had begun to understand the laws of nature, they could tell that this was a high-level battle of the comprehension of laws. The fighters used their understanding of the laws of this world in their attacks and defenses. They used a series of unimaginable moves. For these cultivators, this was a soul-stirring high-level battle. How come this guy can't be killed? Li Lan Nuo, Mu King, and other girls from the Heavenly Academy yelled in astonishment. Regardless of how they fought, they remained intact. The audience watched the battle standing in the subway station. The fighters' fists and feet moved so fast that they were just blurry shadows to ordinary people. Others couldn't see them clearly. When the subway train ran over Agent Smith, everyone thought that he was finally dead. However, when the train stopped, one of the passengers in the train changed into Smith and walked out intact. So powerful. It was more terrifying than being unkillable. Even demons and gods needed time to gather their body parts after being shattered. The hackers had no other options but to run. This part was extremely thrilling since the agents seemed to be everywhere. Wherever the hackers went, the humans around them would turn into agents. My goodness! Many girls shrieked, hugging their heads together. How can they deal with these agents? Chapter 462. The world based on digits. This virtual reality world was created by the Matrix. Xuanhuan analyzed, these agents are executors of the Matrix and are equipped with all kinds of abilities by using the laws. They are almost invincible. Then, how can they be dealt with? No one can deal with this kind of power, Song Qingfeng said with his eyes glued to the scene before him. At this moment, Smith caught up with Neo and fired 2 shots at his vital spot. Then, several more shots hit him. In the real world, Neo's electrocardiography became a flat line. It meant that he was dead since his awareness in the virtual reality world was scattering. If his awareness was eliminated, the so-called The One would vanish completely. Obviously, The One wasn't invincible. Otherwise, the one who had begun the revolution and led them wouldn't have died. However, miracles did sometimes happen in this world. After all, he was a person who had abilities no ordinary people had. Ah! Some people in the audience suddenly shrieked. He's not dead. Yan pointed forward and exclaimed, FCK? Song Qingfeng widened his eyes. Coming back to life? Nalan Hongwu stared at the scene before him as well. Obviously, this kid has gained a total understanding of the laws in the world. A big demon floated in midair and said, it's nothing for him to come back to life. Tang Yu said, the set of laws are virtual, there is nothing strange, right? The laws are virtual? Xuanhuan stroked his beard, looking thoughtful. He pointed at the scene before them and said, this is a complete and real world, even though it was virtual reality. At this moment, the 3 agents found Neo coming back to life. They turned around and fired several shots. However, instead of dodging the bullets, Neo made all the bullets hover before him. It wasn't a pause of time since the bullets behind the hovering bullets were still moving forward. It seemed as if the dynamic scene suddenly turned into a static scene. Then, the camera changed to Neo's perspective. The audience saw everything before them, including the ceiling, walls, ground, and even the 3 agents, had turned into rows of flowing data. Ruanning gasped, is this the basic form of this virtual reality world? Sudanji exclaimed, Is this virtual reality world made up of these numbers and digits? The cultivators from Half City were a little scared by this scene. It is unimaginable. Everyone knew that the real world was made up of yin essence and yang essence, but they had never imagined that digits could also form a world. Also, the world looked so real. Then, they saw Neo block his rivals' attacks as if they were child's play. He first blocked with his hands casually, and then he blocked the attacks with one hand without sparing a glance at his opponents. They were obviously no longer at the same level of strength. At this moment, the agents could no longer be called invincible. Lan Mo laughed and said, "I understand it." They use the lightning energy to show and form digits, and they in turn use digits to form patterns and words, which eventually form a complete world. As a member of UI Taoist Alliance, he obviously was quite familiar with these electrical spiritual artifacts. It wasn't like they never studied these things. This world is completely made up of digits and can only be accessed by consciousness and awareness. This story depicts an idea beyond one's imagination, Gatina said with a sigh of appreciation. It's unthinkable. Tang Yu shook his head and said, "Unfortunately, the virtual reality world can never be real." Li Heran said in reminiscence, "It seems that the intelligence of Red Queen is also made up of numbers and digits. I wonder if the intelligence of these machines is also made up of digits." All the people stared at him in astonishment. After all, except the horrifying supreme treasures which had existed for many years, most of the spiritual artifacts with spirits only had child-level intelligence. You could use such digits to create high-level intelligence? At this point, the movie was coming to an end with the one recovering his power and abilities. As for the agents, they were naturally not his matches. After Neo rewrote the programs, the unkillable abilities of the agents became a joke. Smith exploded into digital debris. The other two agents instantly fled. Ha 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 ha. Awesome. This main character is unrivaled. So dashing. Neo absolutely has the power to save the world. He's so powerful. Song Kingfing said, "I must learn his skill of dodging bullets. I'll dodge bullets this way next time." Lin Xiao added, "Then, you will become a Civ. Young Master Song. Long after the movie came to an end, the audience was still lingering in this wondrous world. It was hard to believe that there were such humans living in such a world depicted in the movie. They were amazed by this story and the development of the plot. The most impressive parts were when Neo woke up from the virtual reality world and the last grand battle. For the young cultivators and warriors, the last scene, in which Neo paused all the bullets and fought the agent with one hand, was super dashing. They were amazed by the unthinkable power and speed that Neo showed. The grandmasters among the cultivators and warriors were deep in thought after watching the movie. They had seen worlds that were artificially created. In fact, the mystical realms in the relics were a kind of small world. However, the world depicted in the movie was complete with everything from the real world. Also, the basic structure of this world was made up of rows of digits. This was indeed hard to imagine. The moment that the movie ended, the three shops instantly got loud with discussions. With their current level of knowledge, even the UI Taoist Alliance could do nothing but borrow some basic ideas from this advanced technology. The AI and the matrix shown in the movie were too advanced for them to study. It wasn't even realistic. They might have a small chance if they understood the Red Queen in Resident Evil. Anyway, they had obtained a deep understanding of the horrifying power of AI. For grand cultivators and warriors, they got a better understanding of laws, and that was the key benefit of the movie. After all, the movie had demonstrated the law with a virtual reality world and showed the structure of this world to all the viewers. It was quite beneficial to those people who either had reached this realm or would reach this realm in the future. They were not supposed to access the knowledge of building and creating small worlds like the mystical realm in the relics, but now, they began to understand some secrets about them. Chapter 463, Test the Theory. This movie is superb. In the half-city shop, a big quilt yelled in midair, "If I construct something with the laws that I know this way, I can change that world however I want. Ha 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 ha. Anyone who enters the area built with my laws will die for sure. The laughter suddenly stopped when it remembered that it didn't even have spiritual essence. How could it create a world? It was deflated. Judge. Thank you. A demonic woman with brown hair and green eyes covered her smirk with her hand. Old demon, your idea is worth a try. You can't try it. It's my idea. This idea sounds good. Unbound King, who had great hearing, overheard them. In the past, few people had the opportunity to deal with such things. But now, after reading the heavenly book and watching all kinds of battles between immortals and demons, many grand cultivators and warriors were gradually getting contact with this new realm. Of course, for most of them, they only got a glimpse of it. This idea is indeed good. Xuanhuan got close and joined the conversation. Ah, none of you can try it. It's my invention. Shut up. If you yell again, I'll deal with you as a troublemaker. Ruanning gave it a hard look. It instantly shut up. Meanwhile, in the Yuanyang city shop, the cultivators and warriors put down their virtual reality headsets one after another. No matter if they were grand cultivators or ordinary disciples, none of them could remain calm. Senior sister Bai felt someone tugging at her clothes. She turned and saw Mew King with an uneasy expression on her face. I suspect that it's our consciousness that's sitting here while our physical bodies. She spoke haltingly. After all, at the beginning of the movie, Neo didn't know that he was living in the virtual reality world. I have the same suspicion. Jiangxi Oyu brought her small arms together before her chest and mumbled, we might be living in a virtual reality world. I'm so awesome, so I must be the one. We'll save humankind together. It was perfect. Nonsense. I'm the one. Mew King complained. I want to be the one too. The big white deer said with its head lowered. Jiangxi Oyu said, whoever has the greatest power will be the one. Sitting beside Jiangxi Oyu, Mr. Fang pinched her cheek with a dark expression. I think you just want to be the one. The Lali copied Neo in the movie and gave him a middle finger in disdain. Big brother, what do you think? Jiang Xuan didn't hear her since he had started watching the movie for the second time. Bai said, anyway, their weapons are impressive. I wonder where we can get them. The other disciples from the Heavenly Academy were also talking about the weapons. Brother Tang, Wangxi said, the Tang family is famous for making machines and spiritual artifacts. I wonder if you can make copies of the weapons in the movie. Right. Young Master Tang. Xu Chengfeng, a direct descendant of the Xu family with excellent talent, was quite close to the geniuses from these ancient families. When he put down his virtual reality headset, the first thought that he had was the Tang family. A burly man also came over. He was Lj of the L family. Young Master Tang, your Tang family. Before he could finish, he heard shrieks beside him. Are these pistols? Mew King stared at the two pistols in Jiangxi Oyu's hands. The antique-looking guns had patterns engraved on the surface. They were copies of Dante's handguns. Humphrey. Wow! Junior Sister Xiaoyu. Mew King exclaimed, can you fire these guns? Yes. Li Lanhuo had watched Jiang Xiaoyu deal with a group of cultivators with these guns. These guns might not be able to deal with strong cultivators such as Lujin Xu Chengfeng, but they were more than enough to deal with cultivators such as Du Zuzi who were weaker. They consumed little spiritual essence and had great power. Of course. After replying, Jiangxi Oyu walked out of the shop and fired 2 shots. Glancing at the 2 bullet holes with smoke in the ground, Wangxi looked toward Tang Yu standing beside him. We didn't make those. Tang Yu said, it seems that the shop owner doesn't only have cars but guns as well. The production of guns was a partnership between Mr. Fang, the UI Taoist Alliance, and the people who won prizes in the Counter-Strike competition. After many breakthroughs that they made in technology, they had long passed the difficult stage in which they couldn't even mimic an ordinary pistol. Jiangxi Oyu injected some spiritual essence into the guns, and blue light instantly engulfed them. Xiaoyu, you're awesome. Mew King had stars in her eyes. Where did you get the guns? People like Xu Chengfeng and Lud stared at the guns with widened eyes. After firing, Jiang Xiaoyu met Mr. Fang's gaze and gave him a victory hand with some smugness. Mr. Fang's face turned dark. "Don't ruin the ground before my shop." Ugh. These weapons looked ordinary, but when Smith and Neo used them, they looked unrivaled. The bullets were fast, convenient, powerful. They could pierce through walls and be used from a long distance. Of course, in the real world, it was almost impossible to upgrade the bullets at will casually. Perhaps the big demon in Half City had the ability to mimic some parts of such power, but it didn't even have any spiritual essence in its body right now. While almost none of the cultivators in the deserted sea realm could reach the realm of laws, the cultivators in the spiritual state were different. Their abilities and accumulations in this aspect were greater than those people in the deserted sea realm. The laws were the rules that all the things in the world had to follow and operate by. In this world, the laws and the rules were the same thing. They just had different names and different places. Almost each of the families in the spiritual state obtained and mastered more than one law, which they had gotten either through inheritance or chance since they had been around for a long time. Some of the laws were stored in artifacts, some were supreme spiritual items born with the power of laws, some were artifact spirits that had been inherited from the beginning of time for ages. The laws were the inheritances that enabled the ancient families to prosper for many, many years. Other than these ancient families, a few extremely powerful forces and cultivators had also reached the realm of laws and had saved and passed down their understanding to their descendants. Therefore, they could mimic some of the power shown in the movie. For example, Gatinian's understanding of wind had reached the realm of laws. If he attached it to a bullet, most of the defenses in the world could be treated as not there before the bullet. Gatinian walked out the door with a benign smile. "Little girl of the Jiang family, can I borrow your gun for a while, master?" Wang Xi looked at Gatinian in bafflement. "After watching The Matrix, I have obtained some inspiration," Gatinian said. "Now, I need a gun to test my theory." "Okay." Jiang Xiaoyu had no choice but hand a pistol to him since he was the old academy master. While gripping the gun, Gatinian closed his eyes and took some time to prepare. All the people gazed at him. They held their breaths, not wanting to miss any details. Gatinian slowly raised the gun. In the next moment, a voice floated out from the shop. "You'll be dealt with as a troublemaker if you break the ground before the shop." The old man looked as if he had just swallowed a dead fly. If possible, he would have beaten Mr. Fang to death. Chapter 464, The Spiritual State and the Deserted Sea Realm. The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3 and The Matrix, the newly released game and movie, became the hottest topics among the customers. To understand what AI, artificial intelligence, was, the cultivators and warriors of Xuanhuan City returned to their seats. After watching The Matrix, most of them felt unsatisfied. Subconsciously, they began to look for something with a similar theme. Bulge asked, "Does anyone know if the shop has similar movies?" With half of her time working as an employee of the shop, Li Lanruo was quite familiar with the shop's movies and games. "From what I know, Resident Evil has a similar theme." "Brother Wang, should we watch the Resident Evil?" Tang Yu asked. While some people planned to watch The Matrix again, others tried to find similar movies to watch. After talking with some customers from the Jua City shop and Half City shop, they began to have a general idea about the categories of the strange movies and games in the shop. The category of sci-fi included the games and movies such as The Matrix, in which people used mechanic spiritual artifacts while their own strengths were not great. The category of Xianxiu included the games and movies such as The Legend of the Sword and Fairy, and Jade Dynasty. As for the category of magic fantasy, they could only experience it through the movie Harry Potter, since they couldn't meet the demons and evils in Devil May Cry 3 and Lords of Hell in Diablo 2 at the moment. "Do you guys want to watch Resident Evil together?" Tang Yu copied the shop owner's tone and asked, "Come on." The tour bus of Resident Evil 1 is about to embark. "Young Master Tang, I'll go. Count me in." "Me too," Wang Xi asked in bafflement. "Junior brother Tang, don't you want to play The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3? "It's not that I don't want to play. Tang Yu said, I'm still waiting for the guide. Someone named New Snow in the Legend of the Sword and Fairy forum posted a guide of the game, and I gained great progress in the game following her tips. Unfortunately, the guide stops at the Immortal Realm, and I'm waiting for her to update the guide. Is she a cultivator from the Deserted Sea Realm? Xu Chengfeng asked. Right, Tang Yu said, it's said that the main shop is over there. Young Master Tang. Xu Chengfeng glanced around before lowering his voice. Have you heard about the tales about the Deserted Sea Realm? What tales? Tang Yu shook his head and said, I hadn't heard of the Deserted Sea Realm until I came into this shop. It's said that the place is very remote and has scarce spiritual essence, separated from us by heavenly barriers. Anyway, it's super inconvenient to get there. Deserted Sea Realm? Ulj asked curiously on the side. Isn't it the name for the place with little spiritual essence beyond the heavenly abyss sea? Tang Yu said, young Master Xu's family is famous for having large volumes of ancient scrolls and documents. Do you have more information about this place? Xu Chengfeng said, I read about it in a fragment of a scroll in my family. I don't know if the record is true or not. Don't you see any records about it, your Tang family? Who knows? After all, no one would have cared about the desolate deserted area before they came into the shop. But now, Tang Yu and others' interest was piqued since they had talked with people from the Deserted Sea Realm about the Legend of Sword and Fairy in the group chat and the guide of fighting bosses in the forum. Xu Chengfeng said, the record said that place is like a huge prison, stating that it's a place for prisoners and is thus ominous. A place for prisoners and is thus ominous? Hearing their conversation about the Deserted Sea Realm, Wang Xi, who was listening on the side, looked puzzled. The ancient scrolls said that thousands of years ago, when the strength of the heavenly barrier weakened, the Zixiao spiritual master had traveled there and brought back a group of cultivators from the Deserted Sea Realm. Really? Tang Yu asked. Then, why haven't we heard of it before? I have no idea. After the Zixiao spiritual master passed away, no one heard of them anymore. Meanwhile, at the shore of Heavenly Abyss Sea, which was north to the Heavenly Academy, it was late in the night. Ocean breezes brushed over the beach, and faint sounds of rolling waves could be vaguely heard in the distance. The people in the small town were sound asleep. Across the ocean to the north of Heavenly Abyss Ocean was the Deserted Sea Realm. The Deserted Sea Realm was called a sea realm since most of the place was covered by seas and oceans. Looking into the distance from the beach, one could see nothing but dark ocean. Even moonlight and starlight were swallowed by this darkness. In the depths of the ocean, there seemed to be an ugly, fierce ghost guarding the place. On the watchtower, the soldiers woke up from their doze and stared into the distance. No one knew what they were watching for. They had done it since the ancient times. Yawn. It was late in the night. Fang Qi yawned heavily while the customers left the shop in twos and threes. Junior brother Tang? Curious, Wang Xi looked at Tang Yu, who had just walked out of the shop. How come you're so late today? Brother Wang, you're late too. Tang Yu chuckled. With a scroll in his hand, Wang Xi rubbed his eyes. I read the official novel of Diablo 2 in the shop for a whole day. I borrowed this scroll from junior sister Xiaoyu to read back at my place. The demonic gods in this story are unthinkable. I recommend you read it, junior brother Tang. Well, I'm afraid that I don't have time for it lately. Tang Yu stretched and said, today, I bought the blueprint of a basic gun structure. I won't be able to sleep well until I can figure it out. Ha 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 ha. Wang Xi said while laughing, I know the Tang family excels in machines and mechanisms. Are you interested in guns? I'm fascinated by guns after watching The Matrix, Tang Yu said with a chuckle. Now after watching Resident Evil, I found that these weapons are quite exquisite. What do they call these weapons? Tang Yu said, art. Yes, they're called art. Castellan Zong, you're in a bad mood today? Elder Yu in a grey-white robe said with a chuckle. The tall Castellan of Yuanyang City said, I thought there were only a few places with high-level martial Dao in the world. However, I saw a post in the forum talking about martial Dao which inspired me greatly. Elder Yu asked curiously, isn't it a good thing? Unfortunately, I had just joined that person's group chat in QQ and chatted for a little while when my computer time was up. He stomped his foot and said, "How come I can't chat with people freely? There are so many restrictions." "It's," said the little Princess Jiang, "is a communication jade which can connect with QQ. Elder Yu said while stroking his beard. "Tomorrow, I'll borrow it and try logging into my QQ account." Zhongwu complained, "How come our communication jades are so lame that they are even worse than those in the deserted sea realm?" Little Xina, close the shop. "Okay, boss." Fang Chi suddenly had the feeling that a pair of eyes were staring at the shop from the depths of the darkness outside. He wasn't sure if it was an illusion. He raised his head and looked out, but he saw nothing. Chapter 465, An idea inspired by the Matrix. Gtinian, an old man who had planned to pass his last years with leisure, got up each morning to drink morning dew and consume the morning sunshine before cultivating his technique for one cycle. Then, he would stare at the clouds coming up from the valley. Behind the green pine tree on the edge of the cliff was an elegant cottage. On the stone table before the cottage was a pot of tea. It was the life of a hermit. But now, standing in the mist while holding an ancient sword in his hand, he formed a sword spell with one hand and chanted, "Sword control technique, up." It was silent. "Sword control technique, up." The sword tip lightly shivered. "Is it because I didn't put enough spiritual essence in it?" He gathered more spiritual essence. Up. A sharp sword energy shot into the sky. Wangxi, who had just come to the door, was startled. It was done. Stroking his silver beard, Gtinian laughed and said, "What do you think of my sword control technique?" "Unrivaled." "Absolutely." Boom. The cottage collapsed, the old pine tree fell, and even the pot of newly made tea was gone. After a long pause, a shout came from the mountain peak, "My purple mist mystic sand teapot." 4 pretty girls presented a dazzling scene in Heavenly Academy. "Junior sister Xiaoyu, where are your sidekicks today?" "Humphrey. Who knows? I heard that they went to the Tang family to order guns." "After all, the deserted sea realm is too far from here." Jiang Xiaoyu said, "I'll tell you what. The shop owner has a big gun which can launch unlimited rocket missiles. It's super powerful. But the despicable shop owner is stingy and doesn't let me play with it." It's said that the shop owner even has the golden sun wheel and golden moon wheel. Mew King gossiped and asked with bright eyes, "He even can use Sword God?" "I haven't seen Sword God," Lilan Yuo said on the side. "But I saw him use Release, and its power was terrifying." "What technique is Release?" The others leaned over. In another corner at the Heavenly Academy, a black-robed elegant young man had a feather fan in one hand while holding a strange blue flame in the other hand. Beside him was a roll of an exquisite drawing which obviously had been drawn last night. With a wave of the folding fan in his left hand, a piece of metal entered the flame in his right palm. Then, the metal was extended and shaped in the flame. Beside him were parts including a barrel, a magazine, springs, etc. They were all components that went into a gun. "It's done." With smooth and swift movements, he put these components together and placed the only bullet in it. "Senior brother Tang, coming." A tall young man wearing green clothes walked in from the outside. "Senior brother Tang, is this a gun?" "Of course. It's a piece of cake for me to make these little components." He waved the gun and put his finger on the trigger while saying, "I improved the formula of the powder yesterday, and its power is even greater than before." Ulch was elated. "Really?" Boom. A mass of black smoke rose in the room. In a beautiful pavilion inside the Heavenly Academy, a purple-clothed, elegant young man stood there with his hands clasped behind his back. "Have you found it out?" "Young master, I found it out. The Matrix is a movie, and the Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3 that they are talking about is a game in the Origins Internet Club." A cute purple-clothed maid stood behind him. "Wangxi, Wangxi, how can you get obsessed with games and toys after defeating me?" The young man's face turned grim. He looked at his communication jade. "He even sent me a message. asking me to play games with him? Do I look like a wastrel? This Wanxi is so lazy and lacks ambition. You'll soon surpass him, young master. No. Xuanhuan said in a deep voice, Nangong's is less powerful than he looks. In the Heavenly Academy, only Wanxi is my match, which is rare for me. Since he can't get out of his current mood himself, I must warn him and get him out of the bad habits. You're right, young master. Where is he? Xuanhuan asked. I think he has gone to the shop again. Take me there. Yawn. Mr. Fang stretched and walked out of his room. Right now, Li Yui had gone downstairs to open the shop. Good morning, boss. Morning. Mr. Fang greeted the shy girl and went to wash up. Please make a bowl of instant noodles for me, with a sausage. The shop had only released The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3 and The Matrix, and new online games were still not available, but the shop was still thronged with customers. There weren't many sci-fi items in the shop, but after watching The Matrix, many customers in Half City and Yuanyang City went back to watch Resident Evil. As for artificial intelligence, the UI Taoist Alliance had begun studying it long ago. Due to their low-level technology, they had never produced any artificial spirits in spiritual treasures and artifacts yet. If they succeeded in the research, they would have no problem producing artificial artifact and treasure spirits. Of course, they had little knowledge in this area, and their foundation was weak. They had learned little in Grand Theft Auto 5 and had only made the new communication jade with their system of spiritual spells. Without any knowledge of programming, it was impossible to create artificial intelligence. They were on the brink of giving up. In contrast, they had a lot more experience in making spiritual artifacts. After watching The Matrix, there was a hot trend of making spiritual artifacts. After all, it would be awesome if they could create a virtual reality world as shown in the movie. Then, in this virtual reality world, they would be the god. How amazing would that be? Of course, it was an impossible task for them right now. It would take them a long time to move from beginners to novices. Although it was impossible for them to create a virtual reality world right now, they had gained some inspirations from the virtual reality world shown in The Matrix and acquired a deeper understanding of the laws in the real world. Building arrays was one example. They built the structure of arrays by simulating the movements of stars. If the people building the arrays could find out the layout and moving patterns of the stars from the study of 5 elements and the theory of yin and yang and simulate the patterns with corresponding objects, the arrays could resonate with the sun, the moon, and stars and borrow strength from them. However, this was a complete simulation. But now, they had a new idea, which was how to build a complete and comparatively perfect fantasy array from the basic structure. Chapter 466, Great New Snow. Except for the parts that hackers could change and overwrite, the virtual reality world in The Matrix had everything that a real world could have. Even if some people knew that it was all fake, their bodies still would think that it was real subconsciously. It was a complete world built on the algorithms created by an AI's superintelligence. In contrast, most of the current fantasy realms and fantasy arrays were low-level simulations of the real world. The goods ones could only give people the illusions, let alone simulating the basic structure of the world. Of course, this was a concern for the supermasters instead of the weak cultivators and young people. They didn't have to spend time on that. Even for the supermasters, they had a long way to go in this area. Anyway, it was something that they would consider in the future. Right now, the only thing that they could do was to watch as many movies and play as many games as possible in this internet cafe. Master. The moment Wanxi and Gatinian entered the door, a figure went toward them. Senior Master Zumo. Zumo came into the shop with the Boping Spiritual Master and Feng Yangzai, who had monitored the Heavenly Academy exam on the spiritual ship with him. Wanxi was about to go up and greet them when a figure with a cold face intercepted him. Brother Wang. Brother Xun. Xuanhuan looked cold. I can't believe that you are throwing your cultivation away. Are you so arrogant that you think you can rest and play after defeating me? Are you so full of yourself? Or you just hold me in such little regard? In the Geocity shop, Nalan Minksu opened the post bar as usual and uploaded a post that she organized while eating instant noodles. In Yuanyang City Shop FCK. New Snow posted another guide. What? New Snow posted another guide? Wanxi's eyes brightened. Master. Good. Gatinian stroked his long beard and said, I'm stuck in the ghost realm. I wonder if today's guide is about the ghost realm. I think so. Wanxi said immediately, Brother Xun, I'll talk to you later. Gatinian looked pleased. Let's go online and take a look. Then, he immediately took a seat and opened the post bar. He saw a highlighted post that was pinned at the top of the bar. Guide, Chasing After Souls in the Ghost Realm. Author, New Snow. Ha ha ha. It's indeed about the ghost realm. Gatinian immediately clicked open the post. The general map of the outer range of Ghost Realm. Map. The discovered side missions. Gong Xiao provided a part of the information. Brother Wang, Junior Brother Tang, hurry up. New Snow updated the guide for the Legend of Sword and Fairy 3. Really? A player with the ID Luxioxian and the profile photo of White Deer replied under the post, thank you. Great New Snow. This guide is awesome. Can you tell me who's this cute Gong Xiao? Why does he always provide information? Gatinian glanced at the reply before copying and pasting it. Thank you. Great New Snow. This guide is awesome. Can you tell me who's this cute Gong Xiao? Why does he always provide information? Then, he hurriedly entered the game after replying. Clicking open the post, Wanxi saw this reply. Xuanhuan was still standing at the entrance, and he was at a loss for words. Young master, is that Senior Gu? Xuanhuan's face turned dark. Not only him, I saw Castellan Zong. And Elder Yu, Zimo, the Boping spiritual master. What should we do now? Let's see what they are doing. He quickly walked over to watch from behind. On Gatinian's screen was a young man. Wanxi glanced at his screen and said, Master, you're fighting the Fire Ghost King already? Fighting the Fire Ghost King? Xuanhuan looked at Wanxi in bafflement. Yeah? I didn't have time to explain it to you before, Brother Xun. You might not know. Then, Wanxi briefly told him about the game. On the screen was a world completely engulfed in flames. Standing before the main character was an ugly, burly, and fat monster with 3 horns on the forehead. The monster had been a human who was burned to death by heavenly fire in the ancient time. After his death, he had turned into a fire ghost and didn't want to enter another cycle of life of reincarnation due to his craving for the freedom in the ghost realm. His spiritual power was great, and the fire that he could use was hellfire and could burn souls into ashes. On the screen, hellfire flew around while lava flowed in from all directions. One could even feel the extremely high temperature through the screen. Xuanhuan murmured with a gloomy expression. I'll see how good and fun this game is. Since the opponent was the Fire Ghost King, the best array to deal with him was the water array. On the screen, Jingtan and Long Q changed positions and used water elemental spiritual spells to deal with the surrounding heat waves so that their combat strengths wouldn't decrease. On the screen, Jingtan formed and cast a spiritual spell, and an iceberg dashed out from the ground. Fire and wind collided on the screen, and lava splashed out while flames suddenly spread all over the place. Young master, this looks powerful. A purple-clothed maid yelled in astonishment. Xuanhuan turned to look at another screen. The scene on this screen looked even more awe-inspiring. The 4 people stood in positions of a pre-arranged array and gathered their spiritual essence in one spot. All-directional demon ceiling strike. Tang Yu yelled. Ah! Dumbfounded, Xuanhuan watched the shattered ground and mountain on the screen. Did young Master Tang launch this technique? How come it is earth-shaking? With gritted teeth, he put crystals on the counter. Sir, I want to play the Legend of the Sword and Fairy 2. Activate the game for my Zyre as well. 8 hours had passed since he started playing. He leapt up from his seat as if there were a spring under his butt. Impossible. Isn't it a game? How come it's so powerful? Brother Wang, this game is so great. The reincarnation of an immortal. I'm the reincarnation of an immortal. Elated, he turned to speak to Wanxi, who had just gotten offline. Yeah? Wanxi looked calm. It's indeed powerful. Xuanhuan turned to look at Tang Yu. Young Master Tang, I just experienced the sword techniques of an immortal. It is unbelievable. Tang Yu looked nonchalant as well. Yeah? Then, he turned to Lij, who had just gotten offline. Junior brother, Lij looked cool. It is indeed powerful. While his face twitched, Xuanhuan thought to himself, can you guys have a different expression when saying the word powerful? Walking past them, Bai glanced at him and said, how come you only learned about it? We're close to passing the game. Ugh. Mew King said in disdain, he looks so startled. Such a newbie. Xuanhuan exchanged a look with his maid. Young master, it seems that only the two of us are new players. Xuanhuan's face turned dark. Ignoring him, Mew King asked, oh, senior sister, I heard that New Snow is going to try to get the perfect ending. Is it true? No. She got the imperfect ending, fighting with Chonglu for some time before being defeated. I guess she will have to wait for the next time to achieve the perfect ending. The perfect ending is so hard to get. Mew King said with a frown. It's said that the players in the Jua City shop all got imperfect endings. It can't be helped. Tang Yu said on the side, Brother Lu has already restricted his power, and that's the best we can get. So powerful, Wanxi said while clicking his tongue. After playing the game for the first round, we can't keep many of the treasures. It's said that New Snow has been focusing purely on sword techniques. We have to admit that the players in their shop are very good. It doesn't matter, Xuanhuan said with heroic passion. When we get used to the game, we'll leave them in the dust. Ha 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 ha. It's good to have confidence. As geniuses of the Heavenly Academy, they could admire others but would never admit defeat. Chapter 467, StarCraft. For most people, the genres of the games in the shop were abundant and complete. However, some people were still unsatisfied as they felt like it lacked something. In this world, some people focused on spiritual spells, and some focused on combat techniques. The Matrix inspired the artifact masters in arrays and fantasy spells, and the people who wanted to expand their forces would go and play The Legend of Mia 2. However, for people who wanted to sharpen their commanding skills in war, The Legend of Mia 2 had its limits. After all, the players couldn't die, which made the strategies used in the game quite different from those in real wars. The real strategies decided the outcome of wars from thousands of kilometers away. Jiang Xuan lounged on his computer chair. He had played many games and had just finished the Huaying ending in The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3. In this ending, Jing Ten would battle with Chonglu 10 years later after the end of the game. It would be great if there's a game that simulates wars so that we could practice strategies and make decisions to command troops. The endings in The Legend of Sword and Fairy 3 had all come out. After fighting hard for days, Nal and Mingsu finally achieved the perfect ending in the second round. Many players who were fast with the progress had gotten to the end. The Zixuan ending had the shortest process. In this ending, Chonglu used his own demonic energy to repair the demon-suppressing tower for Zixuan, and the story ended after the battle with the evil sword immortal. Of course, some people got the ending in which both Xuan Jian and Long Qiu died, which doesn't deserve to be discussed here. By now, the number of activations of The Legend of the Sword and Fairy 3 had surpassed 4,000. The Matrix had attracted many viewers from the day it was released. Even though this movie didn't help viewers improve their strength in clear ways and was limited in this aspect, it still had a high number of activations with its novel plot and imagination. The popularity of this movie even increased the activations of the Resident Evil movie and game. Of course, some players enjoyed the games and movies without expecting to obtain benefits. In fact, Gatinian and Zhongwu liked the Resident Evil game and movie even though they didn't obtain any benefits from them. They liked them because these games and movies brought something new to their long lives of cultivation. Even the Grandmasters found this kind of novelty breathtaking. Yes, it was breathtaking. In the tedious life of cultivation which was thousands of years long, everything seemed the same. Therefore, They sometimes felt bored. It was especially the case with people such as Xuanhuan, who had achieved a realm as high as he could but only had limited years remaining in his life. Cultivation didn't matter much to them, and the only job for them now was teaching disciples and enjoying the last years in life. Even some young people such as Wangxi and Xuanhuan sometimes felt bored. They were born in this huge system and had to abide by every rule of the world, making no mistakes. In comparison, these new things brought them some ripples in their sedate lives in which they do nothing but gain cultivation strength and fight for treasures. The new things weren't better, they were just new and novel. Now, they added some new terms to their lives which was filled with cultivators, warriors, ascendants, and immortals. Brother Wang, I'm going to fight Chonglu today. Xuanhuan was smug since that he could finally meet the most powerful demonic god in the legends. He was excited about this prospect. You suck, Tang Yu said in disdain. I'm halfway through the second round. I suck? You know nothing. I'm invincible. Xuanhuan rolled his eyes at him and said, Jingtan's speed in mastering spiritual spells is many times faster than ours. Now, I've mastered all 3 styles of spiritual spells. I'll absolutely defeat Chonglu. I'll show you. I bet that you can't do it even if you spend all day on it. Tang Yuan said in amusement. Defeating Chonglu is more difficult than passing a tribulation. Wangxi shook his head in resignation. I think it makes more sense for us to bet on if he can pass the tribulation and ascend today. Xuanhuan's face turned dark. 3 seconds after he entered the new immortal realm, his screen turned grey while Chonglu stood with 2 blades in his hands that were covered in blood. He died. I was killed by a tribulation lightning bolt. No one knew how to ascend to heaven and what it looked like above the mortal world. Even Mr. Fang's sword control technique couldn't help them fly out of this world. Each day, people looked up at the starry sky. The sun, the moon, and stars moved, but people didn't know what the stars really were. They didn't know if the sky had an end or what the structure of the sky looked like and how it was different from this world. The only thing was for sure. Mr. Fang couldn't fly out of this world. No one could fly out of it. It was natural that the people in this world had no idea what the galaxy really looked like. Perhaps they still fantasize about a realm of gods with celestial palaces in heaven. It was a realm where every cultivator and warrior wished to go to. In this dreamy realm, there was no aging, illnesses, or death. Sir, what is this StarCraft? Many people were playing The Legend of Sword and Fairy 3 for the second time since there hadn't been new games for a long time. Some players even went to play Resident Evil and cleared the stage. The Matrix had spawned new bizarre ideas in them about the origin of the world. Then, StarCraft might introduce them to an even broader world. Boss. Lai Xiangxiaoyu looked at Mr. Fang imploringly. Can we watch you play the game? I want to watch it. I want to watch it. The big white deer put its front hooves on the counter and looked avid. Xiangxiaoyu stroked its furry head. Hee. I'll watch it with little Bell. Okay. I'll turn on the live stream. Good. Tang Yu's gaze followed Mr. Fang until the latter sat down. You are going to live stream today? He remembered that the last time when he watched the live stream, it was a thrilling battle between an immortal and a demon lord. Jingtan vs Chonglu. The memory was still fresh in his mind. Let's go. The shop owner has turned on the live stream. What is he live streaming? Xuanhuan said solemnly, I'm passing the tribulation. FCK your tribulation, Tang Yu said, let's go and watch the live stream. It was still early in the morning, but people bustled in all 3 shops as the popularity of Origin's Internet Club increased. They turned to look at the big screen. The shop owner has turned on the live stream. The people of the Nanhua faction who were walking toward the computers immediately sat on the couches with unprecedented speed. The people around them looked dazed. Before they could react, half of the seats on the couches had been taken. Soon, a row of blue alphabet-like icons appeared on the screen. Blizzard. Nalan Hongwu glanced at the big screen. Is the shop owner going to broadcast Diablo? He was baffled. The kid only got to nightmare difficulty, right? The screen showed a vast space in the universe, and the dark blue planet in the bottom left corner occupied 1/4 of the screen. There were several icons on the screen: satellite, multiple players, battleship and remains, single player, and black hole, exit. The big letters on the right side showed StarCraft. Chapter 468, War Commander. StarCraft. This name was even harder to understand than the Matrix. Is there a Diablo in this game? Jiangxi Oyu asked curiously, since she saw the logo of Blizzard, which was also shown in Diablo 2 and the official novel of Diablo. Even people like Wang Xi and Bei had read the official novel of Diablo and found it very imaginative. Seeing Blizzard's logo, Jiangxi Oyu immediately wondered, is this game a sequel or a prequel of Diablo 2? It doesn't look like one. Sitting on a couch, Bei turned to the beginning of the official novel of Diablo. Diablo tells the story about the survival of humans who are stuck in the battle between angels and devils. Look. The audience looked at the big screen and saw a metallic aircraft hovering in the dark space with stars twinkling in the background. This seems to be the galaxy. This was a different place from the one described in Diablo. They all looked baffled. Is this space above the sky during the night? Yes, it must be night. Otherwise, how can it be so dark during the daytime? The opening computer graphics, CG, of StarCraft was different from other games. It was the start of a grand world and described the first encounter of humans, Terrans, and Protoss, another intelligent species in the universe. The Protoss was purifying the infested human planet, and a group of unlucky humans was watching it right there. The huge shadow cast by the spacecraft blocked out the light above their heads. When they looked up, they saw the giant thing. If it were a battleship, the bow of the battleship blocked out all the light and filled the people's vision. They felt as if they were a school of tiny fish which suddenly looked up and saw the legendary rock. What's that? This spiritual ship is so huge. It seems bigger than the Academy's sky patrolling spiritual ship. Suddenly, blue light shot out under the ship. The big screen was filled with a wave of destructive blue light. The black-robed Daoist Zemo yelled, "Where did these cultivators come from? How come they can build such a powerful spiritual ship?" In the Geocity shop, a group of people sat on the couches in the lounge area. A white-robed old man was eating spicy sticks with leisure. "Brother Gongxiu, how is this ship compared with the warships of your Gongxiu family?" someone asked casually. Damn it. He put the spicy sticks on the table with force as his face turned dark. There were 3 races in StarCraft. The human civilization was based on science and technology with the assistance of Schneck power. Terran ghosts were one example. The Protoss was also called the race of gods. This race shared some similarities with cultivators or a magic civilization, with Templars being the center of the society. They had powerful Schneck abilities which seemed to be in the same category of magic power and spiritual essence. Meanwhile, the Protoss could cast magic spells and close-range combat techniques with extremely powerful individual combat forces. TL note: Protoss was directly translated into gods in the Chinese version of the game. Their Zerg followed the combat style of insects and beasts. Their greatest advantage was their large population and the lack of fear of death. The Queen of Blades had once been a human and thus could battle using Schneck abilities. Entering the option interface, Fang Chi saw 2 options to operate the system version of StarCraft. The first option was the commander mode, which was the most popular mode. The players would act as the commander to battle and fight with other players. The other option was the single-player RPG mode. In some battles, the players were not allowed to develop commander center or SEVs, worker units, and were equipped with only one or several squads without backup. They could enter the battle as an individual character such as Jim Raynor, the main character of the humans, Sarah Kerrigan, Queen of Blades, Zeratul, a Dark Templar of the Protoss, the Marines, Drivers, other Templars, or Hunter-Killer Hydralisks, etc. Among the characters, only female players could control the Queen of Blades, and Zeratul and some other Protoss characters could only be controlled by male players. Otherwise, The players could only finish the battle from the perspective as the commander. The most classic operation was naturally the commander mode. Mr. Fang chose a human battle and started the game. This was the background of the battle. Since a colony was destroyed as introduced in the opening CG, Mr. Fang was asked to protect another colony named Marsara as the commander. In the original game, there was only a crude map with one commander center and a few SCVs. It was a barren land with a few mines. However, it was different in the system version. When Fang Chi entered the game, he saw a prosperous human colony base. The main base was a lot more complicated compared to the original version, and there was a vast interior space. There were all kinds of buildings, streets, and plants outside the commander center. It was complex and unique, looking like a small town. On the modern streets, some Marines who wore heavy armor were patrolling with huge guns. The pale gray modern rooms were the office of the judicial officer in the colony, and the young female deputy officer was reporting the situation of the colony on the side. Fang Chi looked at the screen and found that he could issue electronic or verbal instructions. The electronic commands were similar to the original version but had more complete functions. Combined with verbal instructions, he could simulate the commanding process of a battle. Of course, it was the operation method of humans, and Fang Chi still didn't know if it was different from the commanding method of the other two races. In the tutorial session, the players must destroy the small Zerg forces nearby. There was a squad of 12 Marines, and Fang Chi casually organized a wing-shaped formation. He found that after he told the Marines to keep this formation, they would do it when they advanced or turned to another direction. However, in the original version, the formation would be disrupted whenever they encountered an obstacle and they would block themselves with awful pathing. After the squad walked out of the center, they saw a squad of Zerglings loitering outside of the colony. Obviously, the Zerglings saw the Marines and swarmed up swiftly. The center, retreat. The flanks, surround them. At Mr. Fang's dizzying operations, the Marines in the center retreated while firing, and the Marines from the two sides surrounded the enemies. The number of Zerglings decreased quickly. When the last Zergling rushed to the Marine in the center moved to one side at Mr. Fang's order. Meanwhile, the other Marines fired almost simultaneously. Their Zergling missed its target and fell to the ground. Gunsmoke filled the battlefield. With smooth retreat and attacks, the Marines killed all the enemies without any casualties. We can command soldiers to battle in this game. The audience gazed at the big screen, realizing that they could not only play the main characters but the commanders as well. Chapter 469, Battle 7 Zerg. At this moment, the audience didn't have the concept of stars and planets yet. After all, the opening CG was short, and the introduction wasn't very clear about this idea. From the CG at the beginning of the game, they understood that a huge spiritual ship above the continent casually destroyed a small spiritual ship. The colony is probably only a name for some new land discovered by humans. Who knows? Although this explanation sounded strange, it was easier for them to understand since it was more in line with their concept of the world. This game feels interesting, Mew King said after some consideration. Lately, the shop had piqued their interest in spiritual artifacts, which included the unique combat style of using these strange-looking spiritual artifacts. But, Tang Yu said curiously, who does that super-powerful spiritual ship at the beginning of the game belong to? No one could blame him for dwelling on this thought since the huge light-blocking spiritual ship at the very beginning of the game was too impressive to ignore. That's a battleship of the Protoss. Mr. Fang returned to the interface where he could select the races and paused his cursor on the golden armor on the right. This race had a completely different appearance from humans. You can also call this the race of gods. Race of gods? Tang Yu and other young people were startled, remembering the destructive force that the spiritual ship had shown. They were awestruck by this race. Zongwu and other senior cultivators exchanged a look of surprise and wondered, so powerful? It's like the race of angels in Diablo, Mr. Fang explained. They are different from the gods of your understanding. Oh really? Many people nodded and realized what was happening. They were clear now after hearing that explanation. It still sounds powerful. Mew King clicked her tongue and pointed at the big screen. Can we command them too? Fang Chi pointed at the words, the third episode, on the screen and said, you can do it after finishing the first and the second episode. We can do that, boss. I want to play it too. Jiang Xiaoyu was the first to enter the game. Xiaoyu, wait for me. Other girls also activated the game. I want to play it too. The big white deer also activated the game. This. Tang Yu and others exchanged a look. Let's go and try the game too. Sir, how come this gun looks so weird? Su Tanji sent him a message. Obviously, she had begun playing the game in the Jua City shop and had passed the boot camp and officer training. In the second episode, Wasteland, main character Jim Raynor appeared, and the players could choose to play as a single unit. Besides, how come the armor is holding the gun instead of me? She controlled Raynor who wore thick armor, and the armor held a huge gun. The Marines in the original game looked as tiny as a thumbnail, but when converted to the real world, it was clear that the armor was one size bigger than a burly man. It was even bigger than the armor of paladins in Diablo. So strange. Tang Yu had already put on the combat armor. The humans are so weak that they need such things to give them power. He fired casually and saw flames shooting out from the muzzle. The air before him vibrated slightly, and then the ground shook with a huge and terrifying bullet hole in it. It was a horrifying sight. In the commander mode, they couldn't feel the power of these weapons through the screen, but now they had a clear view of it. The piercing power was horrifying. This gun is so powerful. Tang Yu gasped, knowing that these guns were not in the same category as those in The Matrix and Resident Evil. Upon closer observation, he even saw electric currents flowing inside. What gun is this? Soon, someone added Mr. Fang in the group chat, Mr. Fang's tour group. Sir, why are the guns in this game different from those we saw before? Li Heran had led the Marine squad and ran into a few Zerglings, and he fired with the gun in his hand, piercing the shells of the Zerglings with each shot. If not for the swiftness of these insects, he could have killed one with 2 or even 1 shot. Oh, that. You can change to the commander mode and read the introduction, Mr. Fang said calmly. C-14 Impaler Ghost Rifle? Su Tanji turned the gun in her hands and studied it with interest. What's this thing? Is it very powerful? I feel like it's even more powerful than my new handguns with spiritual energy. Li Heran said curiously. Only the fully array-engraved sniper rifle with new armor-piercing bullets could be compared to its power. The problem was that there were no engravings of array patterns on this gun. Ghost was the electromagnetic unit. Fang Chi remembered that this thing had been in its experimental phase on Earth before he traveled through space and time, and its energy was derived from electromagnetic coils. When strong electric currents passed through the coil, the magnetic force would shoot out the iron magnetic bullets, which were so powerful that they could turn a tank into a pile of waste metal. The most common ghost weapons used magnetic needles which could be shot out noiselessly. In fact, they were more like sneak attack weapons in use instead of firearms. The Marines in StarCraft used even cheaper items, which was the traditional ammunitions accelerated by ghost force. The supersonic bullets had such power that they could pierce tanks or the armor on the space battleships. Of course, it was fine to fire at tanks. It was better not to mess with space battleships with these guns if one treasured their life. The ordinary people needed combat suits to use these guns. The suits could also restock ammunition and help them aim. It was impossible to use the ghost rifles without the combat suits. These things had reached the limit that the cultivators and artifact masters in this world could understand and potentially study. After all, this world was at a stage even more backward than the world that Mr. Fang had traveled from. There was no way that they could develop even better technology. It would be better for them to focus on the gameplay, sir. Whenever a new game was released, many people would bring questions to the shop owner. Su Tanji and Xuanhuan were among them. What's this multiplayer mode? I found that I can directly choose Protoss. Xuanhuan was obviously very eager to play Protoss after seeing the super battleship. What does it mean by adding a computer bot? Mr. Fang answered casually, When no one plays with you, you can play with the computer. Then, He looked around. I'll choose Protoss then. Then, he looked again. Battle. With 3 Zerg. He added 3 Zerg bots. Number. With the great power of Protoss, I can battle several Zerg. Having witnessed the great power of Protoss, he thought that he could handle quite a few Zerg. Then, he found that the maximum was 7. How come there's an upper limit? Reluctant, he clicked on the button, 1 versus 7. Chapter 470, The Ocean of Zerg. Senior Gu, how come your base is golden? Zhongwu sneaked a glance and thought, I'm still trying to figure out how to use the gun. But Senior Gu's base is already looking so grand and majestic. On the center of Gatinian's screen was a huge pyramid-like building standing proudly in the wasteland. Pale blue light flowed on the metal plates on the surface of the building, while the energy crystal on the top flashed blue spiritual light. The whole building looked beautiful in an exotic way. Standing before it, humans looked tiny. The huge building was awe-inspiring when one looked at it either from the ground up or from the sky down. In the distance, one could see a vast wasteland and the dark blue sky with hues of red. The violent gusts swept up the dust on the ground like ocean waves, and few plants grew on the ground. Obviously, the climate and environment in this place weren't pleasant. This old man knew nothing about the situation. Luckily, a Protoss assistant explained to him the functions of things like the base and the probes. Hearing Zhongwu's question, Gatinian stroked his beard and said with a smile, I'm playing the Protoss. They are the existences that controls that spiritual ship you had just seen. You can actually command Protoss now? Hearing Zhongwu's exclamation, many people looked toward them. Some people not sitting nearby even walked over to watch from behind. Soon, a large group of people gathered behind Gatinian. Can we choose Protoss directly? Tangye looked at his character who was still patrolling with a rifle, wondering why someone could now command the Protoss. Senior, how did you do it? Bei stared at the screen intently. I want to command the Protoss too. The big white deer jumped, but it was even shorter than Jiangxi Oyu when it stood on all fours. I want to watch it too. Surrounded by the crowd, Gatina smiled and said, this is the multiplayer mode, and you can choose Protoss at the beginning in this mode. Can we choose Protoss like this? The Boping spiritual master said in surprise, commanding such a powerful race, you will be unrivaled, right? Gatinian said, of course. In the battle, I chose 7 Zerg as my enemies. I'm sure I can handle them. Zhongwu laughed and said, Senior, you never make mistakes in calculations. I'm sure you will be invincible when commanding this race. Mr. Fang was also looking at the multiplayer mode. Instead of playing, he was reading the rules of this mode. Since it was a real-time strategy game, this mode was different from the campaign mode. The campaign mode was true to the original storyline and simulated the battles in the plot to a high degree. They could choose one battle and ignore the lengthy and tedious parts leading to it. However, in the multiplayer mode, one must build their base, mine, and develop their forces. The lengthy process would bore the players. So the multiplayer mode made some adjustments to make the game more enjoyable. For example, it adjusted the length of time to build infrastructure, the number of base units like SEVs required, and the length of time spent on extracting minerals. After all, if it took a long time to establish a prosperous base like real life, there would be no time to command the battle at all since the computer time would have run out for the day by then. Under the advice from the assistant, Gatinian studied the buildings that he could put into construction. He built a gateway. Then, he trained some zealots. In the multiplayer mode, the commanding methods of different races were almost the same. Besides the verbal instructions, there were some small differences. For example, the Protoss link could help the commander control a few soldiers in the battle, and the controlled soldiers had different combat power depending on the player's performances. The human commander could direct the battle from the distance and even control some machines in emergencies with commands without the driver's participation. Their Zerg units could respond the fastest to the commands of the Zerg overmind among the races and could make subtle and swift adjustments in individual Zerg units. Looking at the sharp psi blades on their wrists and swift movements of the zealots and the Shinek spheres around them, the audience became envious. Zhongwu offered a plan after a moment of consideration. With such powerful soldiers, I think you should move swiftly and give the enemies a heavy blow. You're right. Gatinian sent out all 3 zealots while continuing training probes and zealots. He sent the zealots to explore the map. It was a desert, but the terrain looked good. There was only one exit situated in the southeast end of this vast valley. The 3 zealots walked out while Gatinian talked about the development plan with the others around him. I think you can block this entrance. Tang Yu said, then, no one can enter your valley, right? Yes. Good idea. Gatinian said with a nod, we must move steadily. Even though I'm in the advantage, I can't be careless. Where are my zealots? Staring at the commander screen in the base, he froze for a moment. Where are the 3 zealots I just sent out? Standing nearby, Mu King watched while sipping milk tea. She said casually, maybe they surrendered to the enemies. How could they? The audience had been watching Gatinian build a photon cannon. How could 3 soldiers surrender to the enemies? Unlucky. Gatinian shook his head. This gateway is so unreliable. He glanced at the 4 zealots that had just come out of training. This time, I'll train them myself. Then, he sent out the 4 zealots. Controlling one of the zealots himself, he waved the psi blades heroically and led the others out of the valley. Come with me to hunt down the traitors. They followed the path that the previous 3 zealots had taken. Look. What's that? After walking a long distance in the wilderness, they saw that the ground before them was covered by a blanket of purple slime. Before they could react, groups of zerglings swarmed up. With a scream, one of the zealots was pierced by a thick spike from the ground before it could react. Meanwhile, several zerglings swarmed up like ocean waves. Their zealots that Gatinian controlled twitched twice and died. The screen turned pitch black again. The audience exchanged a look and remained silent. Hurry up, assistant. Build some more photon cannons for me. About 10 minutes later, the audience saw a giant herd of Zerg units like an ocean wave had come to the outside of the valley where the base of the Protoss was situated. The hydralisks shot out their needles, filling the sky like black raindrops. Instantly, the foremost photon cannons exploded. Look over there. What's that? Groups of ugly monsters with wings and dragon heads quickly flew over the base like gusts of wind. Among the Zerg units, there was even a huge mammoth-like beast with long tusks that was several stories high. It lifted 1 foot and stomped a dragoon into pieces. The audience looked at each other and then at the sight in a daze.